This is the second study regarding the mark, and today we're going to look at the mark in association with the right hand. Revelation 13:16 through 17, he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. You would think knowing your left from your right is pretty straightforward. We know what's left and we know what's right. But sometimes in Scripture, everything is not quite as it seems. And so we're going to look at a few things in this study that are quite interesting. We're going to answer a couple of questions. What is left and right associated with? And what is needed from us regarding knowledge of the left and the right. Because when we're talking about the mark of the beast and its association with the right hand, it would help if we knew what the right hand is. What are characteristics of children and the association to their hands in Jonah 4:11? And should not I spare Nineveh, that great city, wherein are more than 60,000 persons that cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand? So there are people in Scripture who cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand, and they are children. But what's interesting is that adults can also lack discernment, especially regarding spiritual things and especially regarding the Scriptures. And that's the difference between you as an independent Bible researcher who can study and interpret the Scriptures for himself or herself, and someone who is just told things and told what to believe, and this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. People who are told things, they just accept them. They don't challenge them. And when I was a child, I was told this is my right hand and this was my left hand, and I just believed it. I'm assuming I was taught correct. But in Scripture, discernment is associated with right hand and left hand, to be able to discern which is which. Let's see an example. We're going to see 3 passages of Scripture that can trip you up if you are not careful, if you are not observant, and if you are not tuned in to what the Scripture is saying. You can overlook these things. Ezekiel 47:1. Afterward he brought me again unto the door of the house, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold, from the house eastward. And I've got a little compass here. So here's east on the right hand side if you're facing north. So the waters are issuing out eastward. For the forefront of the house stood toward the east. So the front of the house is facing east, waters are issuing out eastward. And waters came down from under, from the right side of the house, at the south side of the altar. Now where is that? It says from the right side. So the right side of east facing. Well, what's the right side of east facing? In this case it's south. So the waters came down from under, from the right side. So they're originating from here and they are flowing this way at the south side of the altar. So the south is on the right of the east. But if you weren't paying attention, you would think the waters were not only going toward the east, but originating from the east. But actually they're originating from the south and going toward the east. Sort of southeast. Now this is what I mean by discernment. You can read Scripture, but you can miss what it's saying. And it's the same with the mark of the beast and anything else. You can miss things unless you are studying the Scriptures, unless you are tuned in to what the Scriptures are saying and being observant to what's going on. Discernment requires working things out. Sometimes things are not as obvious as they appear. Let's have a look at another example. Numbers chapter 2, verse 3. And on the east side, toward the rising of the sun. And on the east side, toward the rising of the sun. In New Zealand, facing north, in New Zealand, the sun rises in the east, forms an arc, and sets in the west. That's where it rises, and that's where it sets, from east to west. Just like it says in this verse, and on the east side toward the rising of the sun. The east side toward the rising of the sun. But now let's have a look at the Scripture. Isaiah 59:19. So shall they fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun. So here it's saying the complete reverse thing. From the west, from the rising of the sun. So rising of the sun, assuming setting in the east. Now how do I know this is so? Well, here we have a independent clause. We have our subject, and we have our verb, and we have the name of the Lord, and we have from the west. And we have this phrase. Now this phrase is a supplementary phrase, and it is directly associated with the main clause. So this phrase cannot stand on its own. So the information that is contained in this phrase directly relates to this clause. So we can see the name of the Lord is associated with his glory, and from the west, from the rising of the sun. Now how do I know that this isn't the same as this clause here, and on the east side toward the rising of the sun? Well, like I said, this phrase directly relates to this clause. So from the west, from the rising of the sun. So which is right? Well, they're both right. And if you're facing south, this would work. So it depends where you're facing. It depends on how you are observing things. Now for something really confusing. This example involves deception regarding left and right hands. So the point I'm trying to make is, you might think something is so, but the reality can be switched. Things can be switched up, and that's what we're going to see here. And the mark of the beast is associated with the word deception, and we'll get into that in other studies. And you have to watch out for deception. Someone might tell you this is the way something is, this is how it is, this is what it means, but actually it's false. Genesis 48, and you can read Genesis 48 for yourself, but we'll look at verses 13 through 14 and 17 through 22. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. And Israel stretched out his right hand, and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head. guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. So Joseph is trying to deceive his father when it comes to blessing his children, and he's switching them. So we see a switching from one son, which is Manasseh, who should have gone to Israel's right hand, but was being switched to his left, and Ephraim, who should have gone to Israel's left hand, going to his right. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, we see here that originally Ephraim was going toward Israel's left hand, but Israel the father worked it out and put his right hand upon the head of Ephraim. And notice that word wittingly. So there's some cunning going on here. So Joseph is trying to deceive Israel, but it didn't work. Israel was awake. He was observant. He used discernment to figure out the switch. Now, when we look at some further studies, we're going to see associations with hands to another part of the body that you may not have thought about, that are synonyms, and they're very, very interesting. There's that word bow again, and that word bow shows up an awful lot in relation to marks and deception. So the point of this little study is just to show you that things always aren't quite as clear-cut, and that with regard to the right hand, in this case, and the left hand, there's deception going on, and that discernment is needed. We also saw that the rising of the sun can be in the east, and it can be in the west. The mark of the beast requires deception, because this is how the serpent operates. And when the serpent was in the garden, he deceived Eve. He deceived her, and he didn't come in hard and fast. He was very pleasant, very reasonable. He used positive things about the fruit that he was trying to tempt her with. And that's what we have to be on the lookout for. We're going to be sold a lie that something's good for us. We're going to be sold a lie that something has a positive effect for us, but it's deception. And that's it for this study. I'll see you in the next.